The Philadelphia Eagles are Super Bowl champions. We'll break down the biggest winners and losers from the game next.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Welcome back. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. On today's show, we are recapping, discussing Super Bowl 59, much to my chagrin. I want to talk about the Eagles side first, as they deserve to get some of the attention. Let's talk about Jalen Hurts, who I think there were a lot of questions going into the season about Jalen Hurts. And in fact, Kate, there were some big questions about Hurts, even as we got close to the playoffs. But in the Super Bowl, once again, had a big game, 17-22 for 221 yards, 2 touchdowns, did have 1 interception, ran the ball really well, 72 rushing yards and a touchdown, was the leading rusher for the Eagles. Where do you stand on Jalen Hurts and his dynasty value now that he's won a Super Bowl?
I don't even know if the Super Bowl necessarily does a ton for like my particular evaluation, but I do think that winning a Super Bowl legitimizes him in just the Philly sports scene and with the team in general. Because let's not forget, you mentioned the question marks about Jalen Hurts. Even like halfway through the season, they were a winning football team and they were winning consistently. And it didn't really matter because we continue to have question marks like, are they not passing because Jalen Hurts is not a capable passer? Or are they not passing because they can't get it done? Are they not passing because they don't need to pass? Like whatever the reason was, I think the reason for that maybe lack of passing game in the middle of the season was just the fact that like, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And Saquon was fully in charge there, but he's dynasty QB5. I would make the argument to have him ranked ahead of Joe Burrow. He's been healthier over the course of his career. We know that the mobility is a big turning point for Jalen Hurts. I don't think it does a ton for me personally, but I do think that like it answers a lot of questions about what kind of quarterback Jalen Hurts is. He was a balanced and complete quarterback here in the Super Bowl on the biggest national stage there is.
I mean, one of the things we talked about a couple months ago was who is QB2 in our dynasty leagues behind Josh Allen. And I made the case for Jalen Hurts back then. And I said, the only reason why I could understand why you would get nervous would be because if he doesn't perform well in the playoffs, we've seen Howie Roseman and the Eagles be aggressive before. Maybe they would go out and try to get a different quarterback. But I think now that he's played so well throughout the playoffs and won a Super Bowl, there's just no chance of that happening, right? And in fact, I think this is only going to help his confidence. And I think it's going to help make it where the Eagles are just not moving on from Jalen Hurts anytime soon. So when you can get a quarterback that's going to give you 14 to 15 rushing touchdowns every year, that's going to be playing with the passing game weapons that he has. I know Lamar Jackson's a better quarterback. I think Jaden Daniels is a better quarterback. But for dynasty leagues, I want Jalen Hurts as my QB2.
And let's not forget, he's got his receiving weapons locked up. He's got A.J. Brown. He's got Devonta Smith. Neither of them are approaching free agency. So, like, you can project stability for this offense right now. I think there was a big question about the offensive line. How different is this offensive line going to be without a future Hall of Fame center and Jason Kelce? The offensive line, like, answered all questions, I think, this season. And to have all of those elements of stability in a team that's kind of been orchestrated around the run, that's what they're good at. They have the weapons to do it. They have the offensive line to do it. The projection of this team for the next like 2 years, I think makes it really easy to buy into Jalen Hurts as a top 3 dynasty quarterback.
The rushing touchdown floored is just so ridiculous,
Yes.
right? It's so ridiculous that it's hard to It's hard to put anybody ahead of him other than Josh Allen. Allen's going to get more volume in the passing game. He's probably even get you more volume in the run game. If the touchdowns are just so stable year over year. How about some other guys from this Philadelphia offense? Not a big game from Saquon Barkley, 25 carries, 57 yards. Did catch 6 passes for 40 yards. Finally got to see him do some big work in the receiving game. But, I mean, obviously no concerns for Saquon Barkley long-term here, right? The Chiefs did everything in their power to take him away in this one.
Yeah, I think that was a big focus, and that's probably what, led to some of these big plays down the field is kind of selling out, stopping that run, which was important because Saquon Barkley, if he gets past that first level of defenders, he's gone. And I think that they did a good job containing him for the most part throughout this entire game. Definitely not one of his more efficient outings, but again, I think that was what Spagnuolo set out to do. He did it, but unfortunately it came at the cost of, letting up some of these big plays. There are just too many weapons in Philadelphia's offense to be able to allocate so many resources to stopping one of them in particular. And I think that this was just kind of a part of the game plan. And I'm definitely not concerned about Saquon now. Any thoughts about AJ Brown versus Devonta Smith in this game? Because again, 2 players that they're tied to this great offense. They're tied to a great quarterback, but 2 receivers that haven't necessarily had the most consistent production because of the fact that this is an offense largely built around the run. Has this game done anything to change or this postseason done anything to change your view of them?
No, I mean, it was a relatively quiet postseason for AJ Brown. I mean, he did score touchdowns in the last 2 games at the end of the season, but he had a big play in the first drive of the game that was taken off the board because of a iffy offensive pass interference call. I think the thing for me is for going to the Devonta Smith, this is just what a big game looks like for Devonta Smith anymore. 4 catches for 69 yards and a touchdown. You're probably not going to get any more big games than that. By the way, one of our big bets from Friday's episode was Devonta Smith over 70 yards. That is a bummer right there to get to just 69. But yeah, I still think AJ Brown top 10 dynasty receiver, but I think he's closer to 10 than he is 1. And Devonta Smith, I know he had a big game here, but this is just not the type of receiver I want. Only 2 games all season with 90 or more receiving yards, including the postseason. I scored 9 total touchdowns in 21 games. I like Devonta Smith, the player, but I don't like Devonta Smith, the dynasty asset.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty fair here. I think what you expect from Devonta Smith in most weeks is going to be, that wide receiver 2 production. That just based on his position in a really good offense with a really good quarterback, that the upside for wide receiver 1 production is always going to be there with Devonta Smith. But I do think he's more of a floor player than one of these dynasty assets that you're drafting because of the ceiling.
Yeah, I agree. All right, let's talk about the Chiefs side of things because they were bad on offense. In fact, that's not even a strong enough word to describe how bad the Chiefs were on offense in this game. Let's talk about the long-term future of the Chiefs offense next. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. And that's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it so easy to post your job for free, share with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. Post your job for free. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. Add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. It's no wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn has helped them find high quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are discussing Super Bowl 59, the Eagles' big victory, which just pains me to say. This sucks. But anyways, Kate, let's talk about the Chiefs side of things. This was a rough outing, to say the least. 1 first down in the first half. I believe it was 24 net yards in the first half. They could do nothing. What happened here?
You mentioned 1 first down, Marcus. That came on the first play of the Chiefs from scrimmage. It was a 11-yard pass to Juju Smith-Schuster, of all human beings. I mean, they just couldn't find any semblance of rhythm. And Marcus, what I think you have to look at is the fact that they were just absolutely, completely unable to establish the run. But it wasn't that they necessarily couldn't establish the run. They really made no concerted effort, I think, to establish the run early and often. We had a run, 1 rush attempt from Kareem Hunt here on their second drive, but like this was really a effort where, there was really no plan orchestrated around the run game. They had 11 total rush attempts as a team. 4 of them came from Patrick Mahomes. So when you're telling me you've got, 7 designed rush attempts, your running backs, not a single one of them have more than 10 rushing yards, that's a big problem.
And we saw this play out in the regular season a lot. Like, this offense just had a really hard time starting games. And then usually they would figure it out as the game would go on. But Kate, they never had a dominating offensive performance all season. They never scored 30 points in any regular season game. It was a struggle most weeks for them to get 24 points. And a lot of times it took big time stops on defense, turnovers, short fields. And that's the way that the Chiefs would score. They played Buffalo in the championship game. They finally got over that 30-point mark, but it happened to be against a team that they just knew really well. I am a little bit concerned about this offense long term. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes is still great, even though he had a bad game. But you look at the weapons on this offense, and it's not great. Okay, we're going to go through a couple of these guys in a second. I just have some really big concerns about like what this offense might look like in the future.
I mean, I think all of those concerns are legitimate. Now, I do want to give a big shout out to Xavier Worthy. I know, the end of the box score at the end of the day, when it comes to both the final score, 22-40, sure. Yeah. That was the final score, but the game wasn't even remotely close in that regard. So like, that's a little misleading. So is the overall production here for Xavier Worthy. 157 receiving yards, 2 touchdowns, makes the game look a lot better than it did. But again, a lot of that came in garbage time. There was that deep touchdown very close to the end of the game that just really padded that stat out for Xavier Worthy. But I do want to say, just in general, still impressed with Xavier Worthy. Watching him play, one of my biggest takeaways is that the Bills just fumbled the bag so bad on that one. But I do think in general, you have to look at this offense. It's not a balanced one. Like, we talk about the Eagles, and the first word that comes to my brain is balance, because you do have such a well-orchestrated rushing attack. You have efficiency in the passing game, and those 2 sides of the ball just complement each other so well.
Yeah.
The Chiefs, on the other hand, they don't have the run. They don't have, any sort of, chain mover outside of Patrick Mahomes. And I do think that, when you have some of these instances where you're struggling to find rhythm in the passing game, that if you don't have the run to bail you out in certain times like that, you are going to stall out. You have Travis Kelce, who's aging. You have Rashee Rice dealing with that devastating knee injury. Also, not a guarantee to be present just due to a potential suspension. There are a lot of question marks for Kansas City that make you a lot more hesitant to buy into Patrick Mahomes, dynasty value, even though he's one of the league's top quarterbacks. But quarterback 6 for 29 Patrick Mahomes, with an offense that kind of looks like it could be headed for some darker days. Like, it's harder to buy in.
I will say Worthy is the one guy that I've been buying a lot. We've spent a lot of time talking about Xavier Worthy, but just to recap the season, he played 20 games, but really only 19, because he He was active for the Week 18 game against Denver, but didn't put up any numbers. So 19 games that he played in, scored 12 touchdowns, racked up over 1,000 yards. And again, anybody that watched the Chiefs throughout the year knows that if he had a little bit better quarterback play, he's probably a 1,400-yard receiver with 15 touchdowns on the season. He was so close to having a much bigger year. He's only 21 years old. He doesn't turn 22 until the weekend of the draft. He's just somebody, if this offense is ever going to get back on track, I think it's going to be because of Xavier Worthy. And you mentioned all of the other factors, Rashee Rice and the age of all the other players in this offense. He's probably the one guy that I could see just going bonkers in 2025.
Yeah, I think that Xavier Worthy probably going to see a big time jump in his projected dynasty value here after seeing how he closed out his postseason. In the month of January to start out, his ADP over on Dynasty League Football, wide receiver 24, that's behind players like Chris Olave, Zay Flowers, Tyreek Hill. Like, give me Xavier Worthy over any of these guys. Give me Xavier Worthy over Devonta Smith, even.
Keep going, because I think Rashee Rice is who. I mean, you know how much I love Rashee Rice. I'd rather have Xavier Worthy. Now, when you get in the conversation of like Jackson Smith and Jigba, Ladd McConkey, Garrett Wilson, that's where it gets a little bit harder because those guys just have more size, and I think their bodies may be able to hold up better to more work. But I think Xavier Worthy is at least the same caliber of player as all those guys.
I think that's 100%. Now, I think one of the things that like I keep going back to, I mentioned, buying into Patrick Mahomes and his dynasty value, I think is kind of just like, it's a hard bite right now. QB6, he's drafted ahead of Justin Herbert, Bo Nix, who, again, I know it's Bo Nix. We're not putting Bo Nix in the same caliber conversation as Patrick Mahomes, but when you look at fantasy production, Bo Nix had a pretty outstanding season. Jordan Love, Caleb Williams, like all of these players being drafted behind Patrick Mahomes, but a lot of these offenses, I think, a little bit easier to buy into from like a weapons perspective, a youth perspective.
Yep.
How do you value Patrick Mahomes moving forward in this instance? Because I think people look at Mahomes and, he's like, the argument you can make for going all in Dynasty is that he's the best quarterback in the National Football League. He has the ultimate job security. He is, for the most part, available, like he's not like a Justin Herbert who's just injured all the time. Like, exactly what you're going to get with Patrick Mahomes, but what we've gotten from Patrick Mahomes over, let's say, the last 2 seasons has not been the elite fantasy quarterback that we saw earlier on in his career. As opposing defenses have taken away some of the deeper parts of the field, he's adjusted his game closer to the line of scrimmage. He still makes some of those crazy throws, but doesn't necessarily translate to the same kind of fantasy upside. So how do you feel about that QB6 evaluation for Patrick Mahomes, given the kind of shift? How do you balance philosophically, like, just the safety of Patrick Mahomes as a dynasty quarterback and knowing what you're going to get versus maybe chasing some of those guys that are, being drafted usually behind Patrick Mahomes, but like Bo Nix, total wild card. Like,
buying Patrick Mahomes is like buying Apple stock or McDonald's stock. Like, you're not going to make a fortune right now off of buying those stocks, but you're not going to lose money either, right? And that's just the way I feel like with Mahomes at QB6. Like, I'm willing to pay that price tag because there is value in having a quarterback that's just going to play for the next decade and it's going to be available. That is valuable. But I would also be more likely to go out and try to buy one of these cheaper quarterbacks that you can get 5 to 6, 7 rounds later that might have more fantasy upside than Mahomes. I wouldn't be surprised if the Chiefs kind of retool this offense this offseason and try to put more playmakers around Mahomes and try to play more of an up-tempo, faster offense rather than ball control, don't turn the ball over like we saw this year. But until they start to do that, I don't think you can value him any higher than what he's being drafted right now.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. And I love the comparison, to buying into Apple stock. Like you're probably not going to like lose on
No.
Apple stock, but you're not going to gain either. And that is, I think, one of the interesting parallels between dynasty fantasy football and the stock market,
Yep.
because there are some parallels. And Patrick Mahomes, just probably one of the more interesting players in the league right now because of that safety net. But yeah, I think we are going to need to see some retooling if we're going to reap maybe some return on that investment from a fantasy perspective, at least in the near future.
All right, Kate, let's talk about some players who have uncertain futures going into the 2025 offseason. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there is no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or just want to bet on the fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps the game exciting throughout. I love the NBA. I love watching basketball games. Go check out FanDuel. Go check out all the odds and lines available. And right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That is FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets, and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen every single day. Go check out the new Locked On NFL show. 2 shows every single day. One in the morning with Tyler Rowland, one in the afternoon with Tony Wiggins, available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, Kate, let's run through some players with uncertain futures going into the offseason. Let's start with Travis Kelce. 4 catches for 39 yards on 6 targets. He looked old. He kind of looked disinterested. What's going on here?
I mean, I think you have to be prepared that this could have been the last game that we saw Travis Kelce play in his NFL career. Now, I understand the sentiment of wanting to go out on top and not wanting this to be the lasting memory, going out in what was essentially a bloodbath in the Super Bowl on the biggest stage. Like, I understand that, but I also think I'm looking at Travis Kelce as somebody who, from football standards, he's old. No offense, but gonna turn 36 this year. He's made a ton of money. He's got a lot of endorsement deals. He loves the game of football, but I do think it's clear that he doesn't necessarily look like the same player that we've known Travis Kelce to be throughout his career. Average 8.5 yards per reception this year. That is by far a career low. Previous career low, 2023, 10.6 yards per reception. That is almost a full 2 yards per reception drop off over the past season. 3 touchdowns. That is a career low for Travis Kelce. 823 receiving yards in the regular season. Also a career low for Travis Kelce. I just don't necessarily think he is the same player. And I don't know that, like, what more is he chasing, right? I think the idea of a three-peat was a really great incentive to come back for one more year, even when he didn't necessarily need to. He could have gone out on top. But, like, what else is left? I don't know. And I think that, if I have any opportunity to trade away Travis Kelce before any sort of retirement is addressed or confirmed or anything like that, I want him off my team.
Yeah, I think the Chiefs need to move on, whether or not Travis Kelce wants to come back or not. He just made their offense too slow in the middle of the field, and it really makes it easy for defenses to defend. I agree with you. I want to talk about DeAndre Hopkins next. Kate, how many yards do you think DeAndre Hopkins had total this year, including the postseason, without looking?
500?
A little more than that. 639 yards
Okay.
this season, including the postseason. Here are his last 4 games. 2 catches for 18 yards, 1 catch for 11 yards, 0 catches, 0 yards, 2 catches, 7 yards. He had not had a game over 40 receiving yards, Kate, since November 29th when they played the Raiders. I don't want to say it's over for DeAndre Hopkins because I do think in the right situation, he can still be a contributor. But the days of him being a fantasy relevant receiver are over.
I mean, here's the thing, though. Like, I think that that's the way that you need to look at DeAndre Hopkins. He is a complementary kind of player. He's not the guy at this point in his career. No. And it's really tricky to value players at that level because honestly, like right now, Dynasty ADP wide receiver 62. So that's right behind some players like Dontavian Wicks, Rashid Shaheed, AD Mitchell, Cedric Tillman, Jalen Coker. Like I'm looking at all those guys and I'm saying, okay, they're not the quality of wide receiver that you have in DeAndre Hopkins. But at that point, you should just be chasing upside. Marvin Mims, Darnell Mooney, like Jordan Whittington, even, with the LA Rams. Like there's a lot of other upside that I'm just going to take over maybe some of the known production. I think at this point, much like Travis Kelce, DeAndre Hopkins holds much more name value than he's ever actually going to hold on your roster on a week-to-week basis, regardless of situation.
And the other guy I want to talk about was Isiah Pacheco, who, yes, he dealt with an injury early in the season, but he came back late in November. But Kate, his rushing yards since coming back, 55, 32, 26, 18, 18, 12, 7. He just continued to get phased out of the offense as the Chiefs got closer and closer to the Super Bowl. Finished the postseason averaging 2.8 yards per carry. Finished the regular season at 3.7 yards per carry. 1 touchdown. He'll turn 26 here next month. I think any hope of Pacheco regaining the dynasty values over.
No, I've been shouting from the rooftops here for a while now. The fact that, again, Kareem Hunt comes off the couch and immediately takes on more work than they have ever given to Pacheco in his career, big time red flag. And Pacheco's a guy that in, dynasty terms has held on to, I think, a lot of value much longer than he ever should have. Doesn't have that guaranteed, draft stock. Like it doesn't have that first round draft capital to kind of keep him afloat, maybe in the conversations a little bit longer. You love the player, but there's not a ton of money attached to his contract. There's not the draft capital attached to him. Like it's too easy right now, I think, for the Chiefs to move on. And I do think that with his health history, he is a complimentary player, but he is not a workhorse. And I do think that he's a guy that isn't necessarily going to help the Chiefs achieve their goal of like finding rhythm in the run game, because he is one of these guys that I don't think you can rely on to give enough work that he's ever going to reap that kind of dynasty value. Now, are we like crazy that the only question marks we have heading into 2025 are related to the Chiefs? Is there anybody that you have red flags when it comes to the Philadelphia Eagles?
I mean, they're just so consistent, like in terms of like what we expect from the players. I have a little bit questions about like Devontae Smith's upside. I guess the only one for me would be like Dallas Goedert, who missed a bunch of time with injuries this year. 496 receiving yards in the regular season, but 170 of those came in one game. So if you remove that one game against the Saints, 326 yards in the rest of the regular season. He just doesn't move the needle a lot because he's being drafted outside the top 8 tight ends anyway. So it's like, once you get to that range, Kate, it's like, who cares? You're just taking tight ends that start for teams. Yeah. So no, not really. I think we basically know what we expect from the Eagles week in and week out.
Man, what a crazy couple of years we've had to be able to devote an entire segment here on the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast to Chiefs players that we're concerned about moving forward.
Yeah. Wolf. What a terrible 2024 season. Can't wait. I'm so excited now that it's over. We get to talk about the offseason. We're going to continue with our divisional reviews, recaps, looking ahead to the 2025 offseason over the next couple of weeks. And we're going to start getting you ready for draft season. We're like just 2 months away from the draft. We've got the combine coming up later this month. So while the NFL season has ended, it never ends here for us in Dynasty World. So make sure you're downloading the podcast. Wherever you get your podcast, we are free and available on all platforms. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus _Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.